Can we rate on a big round of applause for Brian Johnson? Right. We thought we'd bring...
Thanks to Chris.
Big round of applause for Chris. This is his eagle.
My eagle.
Oh right, sorry, you've lost it. He paid me 20 quid.
Oh shit.
I got change. Right. For people who don't know, Brian Johnson has worked on so many films, sci-fi films, and Empire Strikes Back, in the days when it was groundbreaking to learn new technology, new techniques that make the films we have now such a success. So, Brian, how did it all begin, your work in the sci-fi special effects industry?
I started by sweeping the floor in a film studio at Shepperton Studios, and Alston and Halifax were Anglo-Scottish Pictures. And then I learned to put film into camera magazines, became what they call a clapper-loader. And I worked for a genius called Les Bowie, who was a matte painter, matte artist, who used to paint scenes on glasses, superimpose them on stuff with live action underneath. And then I took it from there, very slowly, bit by bit, learning from Les. And I went in the Air Force for 2 years, National Service. When I came out, I worked on a picture called The Day the Earth Caught Fire, which was a hammer picture, black and white,
Right.
where the Earth goes out of orbit because of an atomic explosion, gets near the sun, and gets heated up. And that was all special effects of one form or another. In those days we didn't have any money, so we went and filmed at Biggin Hill and used aircraft engines attached to aircraft
Right.
for the wind.
Yes.
So instead of having proper wind machines, we didn't have the money for that. And you learn by all these little bits and pieces gradually to get down the road. And then I worked on FAB XL5.
So how
supercar.
How did you meet Jerry and Sylvia Anderson to work on this?
One of the other people working for Les Bowie was Derek Meddings.
The legendary.
The legendary Derek Meddings. And he was working, as well as Anglo-Scottish Pictures, he was moonlighting because he needed money for his kids, for a company called FAB Films, which was Anderson Provis Films, at Maidenhead. So he used to go there in the evening and work for them. And then when they moved to Slough Trading Estate, and he needed somebody to give him a hand, he called me. And I went and started work on FAB XL5. Supercar, first of all, so briefly.
Yeah.
That was just coming to an end, then FAB XL5, Stingray, came after that.
Because you were
Thunderbirds.
Because we were talking about the Fireball XL5 craft and how you actually was above it and launching the craft on the rails.
The only way we could make these things fly was to attach little tiny tungsten wires to the models and then lift them up on a frame and then fly them. And to do that, in the tiny studio that we had, with scaffold boards on a metal structure, and you would walk down the scaffold boards, 2 of them, till you were right over the top of the set, and then you'd hold the model on these wires and then swing it through the frame.
Did we have any accidents?
No, because I was holding very tight to the roof, so I didn't fall over.
Right. And this is days before health and safety. I presume that would not be allowed now.
No health and safety. We actually, at one stage, we were using blue asbestos for the landscaping. So, because it was available on Slough Trading Estate.
And also from Fireball, the classic shot from Stingray with the fish and Stingray following. You worked with Derek.
Derek and I. Derek had Stingray and I had the fish. I think, or was it the other? I can't remember. That's so long ago.
I think it was the fish that went first, and then Stingray followed it.
Yeah. And then they fell apart. When we took them out, they were sort of falling apart, so we had to dry them off and glue
them back,
and then have another go. So that's how it was.
And then obviously moving on to Thunderbirds. Was it the same procedures that you were using on the previous, or was it was a constant innovation of techniques?
Yeah, we honed everything up, and as little devices like small electric motors and JetX motors and sorts of heavy one, we use those, and we use gunpowder and other stuff with explosions wrapped in tape and stuff, you know, and we just learned.
Because you can tell me if I'm right or wrong with this. I was told that when you settle everything on all the pyros ready to go, the explosions, some pieces had a lucky band around them to make sure they flew out further. Because you get that, because the great thing about the effect shots that you did and worked on was you used to get like a fireball going out, and you used to have a piece of debris that was actually on fire flying out of that fireball to give them even more realism.
Well, yeah, sometimes, and sometimes it was just a mistake. We got the calculation wrong for the explosions, and they were bigger than we thought. So
right.
We used that in the shop, but didn't know it was going to work quite as well as it did.
And then you obviously, moving from Thunderbird, you left. Do you want to talk about how you left Thunderbirds and moved away from Jerry Anderson a bit?
Well, I got offered a job on a picture called 2001. It was being made in L Street, Boreham Wood in Hertfordshire. And I never really liked puppets anyway, but I quite enjoyed doing the effects stuff. And then, so I got given this job. Asked if I would go and see Stanley Kubrick, who I knew by reputation. I went along and I got the job. And by that time I'd given my notice in at Anderson Pictures, Anderson, AP Films. And so I was called into Jerry's office because I'd been asking for a rise. Because in those days I used to earn £30 a week for 72 hours work. So it wasn't exactly the highest paid job, and it was hot. But they wouldn't give me any money because they said they couldn't afford it. And then on the last week that I was due to finish there, Jerry called me into his studio, into his office, and there was all the board of AP Films there, standing around looking a bit uncomfortable. And he had a huge cigar, which Lou Gray had just given him, which he'd lit up. And he told me that Lou Gray had said that he could triple my money to keep me there. So he said, so what do you think about that? I said, well, I gave you a month's notice. I only had to give you a week. I gave you a month. So I'm going to work on 2001. Are you? He said. I said, yeah. And he said, expletive. You'll never work in the film industry again. And I left.
And then you worked on 2001?
No. Yes, I did. Yeah, 2001. Yeah.
And like I say, with 2001, I mean, if you think back of sci-fi before 2001, how it was, 2001 was groundbreaking in design, orchestral, everything about it, the look, the cinematography was just so breathtaking. And you can watch 2001 today and it still stands up strong. Unlike some films that are probably CG, we'll talk about CG later, but you can look at CG stuff and it doesn't hold up, but 2001 still does.
Well, Stanley Kubrick gathered around him quite a load of people that knew what they were doing. Doug Trumbull, who was a year younger than me, but knew more with his little finger than I knew about special effects. Arthur Clarke to write the story. Harry Lang, who used to be worked for Werner von Braun at NASA, and he designed all the models and the landscaping and everything else. And we got NASA feedback for the moon surface. So as we were building the moon bus sequence flying over the moon surface, we started off with quite rocky prominence, and then as the NASA photographs came through from the moon, you could see it was much smoother and shallower. So we kept having to change. We reshot the moon bus sequence, I think, 3-4 times, because the landscape kept changing over the time that we were doing it.
Did you actually work on actually making some of these models? Or?
No, the models were made at Master Models and Space Models, I think. And Brian Huxley, Larry Barr, all those guys, they made them. and then we worked on them. My job was to look after all the models on a big table, black velvets everywhere.
Yeah.
And the Discovery model is 54 feet long.
Would you that's big.
That's the bulb with the long bits at the back and the engines at the back.
That would say that would be probably the biggest miniature that's been ever made.
Probably, yeah.
Probably.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, did it need to be that size due to the technical equipment they had to shoot it, or nowadays could it be made smaller? Was it to do with the cameras, to get the right angle?
Well, it was to do with the fact that it had to have a lot of detail on it, and it had to be photographed in sections for various shots. Some shots were never used, and so 54 feet worked out to be about the right size for the big sphere at the front and the windows and the projecting in of the images on the windscreen section. So it had to be pretty big.
And then obviously moving on, Alien. Working with Ridley Scott, obviously Alien, everyone knows about Alien, the designs of Alien, Gaga, or Giga Gaga, how you want to pronounce it, were creating the ultimate badass alien. That is the alien. But the ship, the Nostromo, talk us about working with Ridley Scott.
I'd like to start right from the beginning on that. When I first started talking about doing Alien, it was because I had signed to do the second series of Thunderbirds. Space 1999, beg your pardon, Space 1999. And some Americans came from Fox and said they were going to make a picture, and I explained how I'd done stuff on Space 1999. And one of them turned out to be George Lucas, and the other one was Gary Kurtz. And I just signed to do Jerry's second series of Space. So I said, I can't do it because I've signed, and they said, well, you can do the second one. It's called The Empire Strikes Back. And in that time, the Fox people, Peter Beale, who was the head of Fox in Europe, said, oh, I've got a picture that I'd like you to consider. And that is Alien, this picture called Alien. It's Brandywine Productions. Dan O'Bannon wrote the script with Ron Suchet, and Gordon Carroll and David Giler and Walter Hill was the director. And so I met them all at Soho Square at Fox's office and talked about, having read the script, talked about how the chest burster sequence would work with John, it wasn't John Hurt, and it was John Finch. John Finch was going to be the actor that took that part. And laying through the top of the kitchen table with the chest burster mechanism, so he was going down through the table more than the chest was, which we'd moulded from his kind of life thing in his body. And we got to the point where we had to do the life casting of his body. And so Peter Boise, who was a sculptor and did all the plaster stuff, stuck all the plaster over his head and around 2 straws up his nostrils and waited for the plaster to set, which would give me claustrophobia. And when they said, well, okay, John, we can take it off now, he'd gone into a diabetic coma. And so they hadn't realised he'd been unconscious for about 30 minutes. So they rushed him off took all the stuff off, rushed him off to hospital. And that was him gone from the show because the insurance wouldn't have him on the show. A hadn't told them that he was diabetic. And so we had a 2-week hiatus where Ridley changed the interior of the command section because he wanted the roof to come down to suit the wide-angle format for the camera. And John Hurt turned up, and then we did it again with John Hurt. And then we got on to building the various bits that we needed to build. And I was shooting at Bray Studios, and also doing the floor effects at Shepperton Studios with my crew. And Ridley was changing things all the time. So I had a small model of Nostromo made, which I used to take over to Ridley at Shepperton while he fiddled about with it and did sketches and things like that. And then I'd take it back to the boys and we'd modify And we built the thing, it was about 16 feet long, I think, the actual.
It's a big miniature.
Yeah, and so we eventually got it done, and then we filmed it at Bray Studios. By that time, Ridley had finished, they'd run out of time at Shepperton Studios, so they struck all the sets at Shepperton, brought them over to Bray, and they didn't exactly reshoot the film at Bray, but they shot a lot of sequences at Bray using the sets that had been built at Shepperton while we did all the effects work on the models and stuff.
Because, like I say, obviously, we're going to talk about space in a minute, but obviously from Alien, you went up to Aliens, because I didn't know you actually did Aliens. I always thought Alien, that was the thing. Obviously you worked on Alien, which some people say is actually better than the original.
I like Jim Cameron's script. I mean, I like the script of the first one, but the second one had real action in it. And so he showed the monsters more than Ridley did. And Ridley's worked well for the first one, and I think Jim's was complimentary for the second one.
Yeah.
And so I started on the production, and then a company called LAFX said they had all this blindingly new equipment, and Jim Cameron said, "Sorry, Brian, but you don't have the same level of equipment, motion control equipment. I'd like to use LAFX," and I said, "That's fine." So I was laid off production. LAFX came in and they provided what they brought, which they said was mind-blowing stuff, were 2 Navy range cameras that were rusted for used for photographing guided missiles. They didn't have any more motion control stuff than we did, actually. And so Jim fired them. But that was later on in the movie. That's why on the credits it says certain effects by LAFX. It doesn't say anything else. And the wife of the man who owned the company, LAFX, got my Academy Award. So that messed me around a bit mentally. But then BAFTA very kindly came along and gave me a BAFTA award, so it was all right.
Indeed, as they should.
Yeah, so much for my crew.
Well, like I say, if we pop back to space, all the work that you worked on 2001 came very handy to work on space.
It was my homage to 2001, really.
Yes.
The moon base was similar, but not the same as the one on 2001.
And you designed the Eagle.
I designed the Eagle and
the Hawk.
The Hawk and a few other things. And then I had a team of model makers, Martin Bauer, Terry Reid, a load of other people, and they all put all these things together using odd-shaped bits and pieces of plastic and stuff, and then adding kits to it and everything else.
What was your inspiration to create the Eagle?
When I worked with Doug Trumbull on the Moonbus sequence in 2001, I did a sketch of a thing which wasn't quite the same as that. It had rounded engine pods, side pods, to contain fuel, and I made it sort of squatter, shorter, but it had an escape capsule front end,
right,
so that in the event of disaster they could boot that off and come down somewhere. And I threw those sketches away in 1966, I think, because it didn't mean anything I didn't know I was going to be doing later on, nearly 10 years later on, doing Space 1999, but I remembered it, and I did some drawings, and I got a really good draftsman from Pinewood Studios, Mike Lamont, who's Peter Lamont, the designer of bombs and various other things. And Michael turned my crude sketches into sort of mechanical drawings. But they weren't quite long enough, so we photocopied the drawings and then cut them up with scissors and laid them and doubled them up, so we got it the length we did, so that each section was sort of modular, and then added the bit in the middle, the passenger module, and had other modules made as well. And that was it.
I mean, looking at the design, it always reminds me, the front section always reminds me of Thunderbird 2 because of that shape, that lovely shape. But the whole thing just complements, it just works so well. And when you say modular, which is that this is it with NASA and everything like that, everything will be made separate and taken up and then constructed.
Yeah, and also I had insects in mind. I thought it looked a bit like a grasshopper and things, front end. Bit of inspiration there.
And then when you moved on to doing the Hawk.
Well, the Hawk, it was in War Games, I think.
Yes, War Games, yes.
And so I did a sketch on the front of my script and gave it to Martin Bauer.
Yes.
And then Martin took that crude sketch and made the Hawk, and then we took it back to Bray and added bits and pieces to it, like we always do. And sometimes take things off, and then we got it how we wanted it.
But didn't it come white? And then you repainted it orange because it looked too much like the eagle?
Did it?
Yeah. No, well, as I can, because I've seen the original, and you can see how it was painted, brush painted. Normally everything's always sprayed, and there was sectioned because all the nose cone, obviously. Because Chris Potter, help me out here. Come in. Big round of applause for Chris, because this is the man who knows everything about space. These things. So I'll give you the mic, and you can just talk.
You obviously hi. Yeah, I think that the stories and folklore is Martin delivered the Hawk in the white and grey scheme, and the studio felt it looked too much like an eagle, maybe in the shots, and then added the orange paneling to it.
I felt it looked too much like it was my decision, I think, I seem to remember. And I got Cyril Forster, who was my artist in residence, to put all the red and orange all over.
Right, yeah. No, it's quite crudely painted. We've obviously got access to the original still.
Oh, well, there you go.
But,
so long as it looked like on the screen, that's all I was worried about.
absolutely, yeah.
Because we had 425 line resolution, not Blu-ray resolution like we have now, so we can see all the wires and all the bits that we missed out and stuff. You know.
We're the sad people now who sit there and freeze frame those Blu-rays and look at all that detail so we can build things like this.
It's easy to be wise after the event when you can hold frame on a single frame and pick every damn thing out. We shot it for 25 frames a second, and that's how it should be viewed, like that, and not frame by frame, apart from the model makers.
Thanks, Chris, for helping me out on that.
Thanks, Chris.
You see, it's like when I come to build every miniature, I end up having to ring these people up or Facebook, and then they send me all these images, and then I'm like, okay, and then they say, oh no, that's Eagle 2. You've got that wrong. That's Eagle 2. No, that's Eagle 1. And then eventually they drive it into my head. And it gets to the stage where it's like, I see a bit of the eagle and go, that's Eagle 1, that's Eagle 2, that's Eagle 3.
In Breakaway, there were a lot more than 1, 2 and 3 eagles. There were loads of them.
I know,
the
yes.
whole idea was that there were basically 20 or 30 or 40 of them. So if there were slight differences between each one, I didn't care about that at all.
How did you feel when the second season? Because a lot of the fans prefer season 1 to season 2.
Well, I think everybody did, didn't they? I mean, Jerry hired Freddie Freiberger. He went over to the States to get a script writer because Abe Mandel, who was the American one, said you've got to have an American script writer. So Jerry went over to the States, met Gene Roddenberry, Star Wars. Oh no, not Star Wars.
Star Trek.
Star Trek.
Yes.
Star Trek, and said to Gene, do you know any good script writers? And Gene said, yeah, I've got this guy, Freddie Freiberger, he's really good. What Jerry didn't know was Gene Roddenberry had just fired him 3 weeks before. So I was told. So the scripts weren't great, the second series, and we didn't have any money, there was no money. I was told, you've got to do the Maya transition thing, but we don't have any money, so how are you going to do that? The only thing I could think of doing was zooming into the eyeball and then doing a dissolve and coming back out with whatever Maya was then dressed in.
But it worked.
Yeah, I know, I was lucky there, I'm really lucky. I couldn't think of anything else to do.
Right. And then, obviously, with space, we mentioned briefly Star Wars,
yeah.
But when they were actually creating, I've been told, when they were creating the Millennium Falcon, the first miniature that they were looking at to do the Falcon, George Lucas said it looks too much like an eagle.
Yeah, he did. I think that's right, yeah. Yeah, so the result was a magnificent second generation Millennium Falcon, which was really good. I liked it.
Yeah. And then obviously you got to work on Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah.
What was it like? Obviously you worked with Kubrick. How did it compare to working with George Lucas?
But it's a whole different ballgame. Stanley was in charge of everything, absolutely everything. On Empire Strikes Back, we were shooting at Elstree, and we were shooting at ILM in California, Northern California. ILM hadn't been set up, so that was part of my job, was to help set that up. And there was a lot of distance between the two places, and George had decided he wasn't going to direct the second one because he got so ill making the first one. He's very nervous, but and intensely diabetic, I think, which was one of the problems. So he got Irving Kershner to direct the second one, but he was always standing behind Irving Kershner's shoulder, saying, "That's okay, well, yeah, do another one."
Yeah.
Irving Kershner had his own way of doing things. He did a really good job. In fact, the combination of the two worked out really well.
I think a lot of people think that Empire Strikes Back is probably the best one out of the trilogy.
Well, I like to think so.
Definitely. And you worked on the sequence with the attacks, am I right?
Well, Phil Tippett and John Berg did the animation. I didn't, but I filmed a lot of stuff to do with that, with cloud plates and all sorts of other things.
Right, I think I've exhausted my questions. I think it's time you got a chance to ask Mr. Brian Johnson. So if you've got a question, just put your hand up, I'll bring the mic over to you, and you can fire a question at the gentleman in question.
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy. Nobody, oh yes.
Hi Brian.
Hi.
Thanks for all your work, really inspirational throughout all the years. Inspired me to build a few of my own and blow them up in the garden, so thanks very much for that. I had lots of fun with that. You mentioned obviously that the Thunderbird's models were on strings. What were the armatures used for the Eagles? Were they the same?
Strings.
They were on strings as well?
No, actually they were on poles with black velvet.
Okay.
So we had a lot of black velvet up, and then the model was put on with a pole out the back, which either fed it with compressed air or nitrogen or whatever it was. And then we moved the camera rather than move the model. A lot of those shots is the camera tracking past the model. Then we had a special viewfinder which was divided into squares, and then we had a board which had equally shaped squares, and wherever the camera tracked, we would draw lines to see where it had scanned on the film. We then wound the film back in the camera, moved the camera position to a second one, still using the same eagle, and did a second pass, so there were like 2 eagles, or 3 or 4 or 5, however many were needed. It's all multiple exposure, and then after that we added stars in the spaces where they weren't. And then so at the end of it we had, on original negative, 35mm, we had a complete shot, which could then go off to the for development and print. That's why the quality was there.
That was to take hours. Fantastic, thank you.
Okay.
Any more questions? Yes. Put your hand up again.
In 2001, there was a 50-foot model of the Discovery. The ship went to Jupiter, and also we know you mentioned about the Nostromo. And the size of these models, what does the studio do? It's something like a 50-foot model after it's finished and also the props.
What does it do with them? It films them.
But when they're surfaced to requirements, do they just trash them?
Well, what happened was all the models were stored in a warehouse next door to Elstree Studios, not Boreham Wood where we were, but Elstree, which was down the road. And there was a freighting company there, and they used to store stuff. So all the models were put in storage, and then MGM paid for the hire of the storage. When MGM was bankrupted, which 2001 bankrupted MGM, and MGM had to sort of quit, they wouldn't pay the storage fees. So all the models were taken out and trashed on a council site in Stevenage, and the big space was there for ages. Somebody went and photographed it, and it was on the net for ages. Some of them escaped, like the Aries that went out to the States for an exhibition, and one or two other things. The rest of them were just trashed. All the satellites and all the other stuff, all gone.
It's a sad thing to see all that hard workmanship just thrown away.
Yeah, but it's a movie, you know.
That's it, yeah.
Once you finish the movie, you're on to the next one. You've forgotten about that, and sometimes you don't even go and see the movie. You know? Sometimes you do.
Any more questions? Yes.
Do you have a personal preference to what you've constructed in the way of the models?
Well, I like the Eagle for a number of reasons. One was because somebody told me that somewhere in the NASA engineering workshop there's a big picture of one on the wall, which it pleased me immensely. And then I think some of the stuff on 2001, the Moon Bus, I enjoyed working with Doug Trumbull on that. And then on Aliens, the second of the Alien films, the dropship, I like that, and the Sulaco. The model Sulaco was about that long. When it flies over over some clouds and stuff, the clouds are actually micro balloons just poured onto the glass. Works, you know. That's because Jim Cameron was, because he was a special effects man and a production designer and everything else. He knew what could be got away with and what couldn't, and so you couldn't fool him. So you had to tell him what you were doing. And if he asked you to do something, you did it. That was fine. But if you didn't do it, the proverbial used to hit the fan in a big way. But we did all right. We shot everything at Bourne End, in my studio at Bourne End. And I just used to take the end result along to Jim. He'd either say, yeah, that's fine, or we need to do this, or we need to do that. And when we were shooting the dropship coming through the clouds, we used cotton clouds on bits of wire, which we shot at Pinewood Studios. And I arranged all the clouds into what I thought were quite good cumulus sort of clouds. But I knew Jim wouldn't like it too much, so I told him what I'd done. And he came onto the stage. He was going to go back shooting what he was doing. Instead of that, he spent about an hour rearranging all the cotton wool stuff to do it how he wanted. Well, that's fine. He was the director, you should give him what he wants. You know, that's it.
How hard was it to do in Aliens? Was it a really hard sequence with the actual dropship coming in and crashing?
No, it wasn't, because I didn't do that. So
Oh, you didn't do that sequence?
John Richardson did that.
Right.
That was in the period when I wasn't there.
Gotcha. So that sequence you didn't do. What about the one with the actual dropship coming in to the main base? Was that yours?
Yeah.
That was your work.
Yeah.
Right. No worries. Any other questions? Any more questions? Yes, over there.
There we go.
Hello, Brian.
Thanks.
Just a question really about your sort of early start in your career working with Les Bowie, because yourself and quite a lot of effects
Les was my mentor, second father, great lateral thinker, and Kit West, Mickey Alder, loads of us all, Terry Sugar all worked for Les. Bowie Films had at one point had 40 effects technicians going out and working on various pictures. Battle of Britain and a load of other things. Lots of the David Lean pictures had Bowie Films people supplied to work on. So yeah, working for Les was great.
Did you find yourself on any of the Hammer films while you were with Les? Because Les did quite a lot.
Well, I left school when I was 16, and I worked on, and Les was working on Hammer pictures, And I got a job after Anglo-Scottish Pictures in '67, I think it was, working on Phantom of the Opera with
Fisher.
I can't remember who was in it now.
Edward de Souza and Herbert Long.
And also Heather Sears. And Bernie Robinson was the production designer. Hammer had no money at all. My job was to put smoke into a sort of sewer set. And Bernie Robinson designed this set so beautifully that I used to eat my sandwiches at lunchtime sitting on the edge of the sewer because it looked so real and yet it was just, you know, large scale and very photographically accurate sort of feeling, and I loved it. And Bernie Robinson, some of his sets were amazing. He used all of the car park and various bits and stuff with virtually no money at all. He was a genius. And Les used to do the matte paintings and various bits and pieces for Hammer. And yeah, so it was good grounding actually.
Any more questions? Yes.
Hello, Brian. Hi. Very simple question, but probably very difficult to answer. But out of all of your TV work and your film work, what are you most proud of?
That's a big question because I've enjoyed working on so many pictures. And I haven't always had the same crew. You have to pick the crew to do the picture rather than have a family that you employ, and then they're not quite so good on some things and better on others. So I enjoyed Empire Strikes Back, I enjoyed Alien and Aliens, and Dragon Slayer. I don't know if you've ever seen that picture, and The Never-Ending Story. That was a tour de force because we were out in Germany, and I built the biggest blue screen ever built there, with strict instructions because we bought the screen, each blue screen. They were 94 feet by 35 feet. Each blue screen. That was to have the rock biter on his. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's on a stone tricycle thing, steamroller thing. And he had to come blundering through the undergrowth. And because it was in Munich, and in the winter time it was really cold, and the screen was made by Stuart Screens in America, and it was in California where they don't have any freezing weather, not in LA anyway. So there were strict instructions to keep all the doors closed on the stage so that the screen didn't shatter or fracture in the wind or whatever. I went in one Saturday morning and all the doors were open at both ends of the stage with a howling gale going through. It was about minus 10 degrees. And to my utter horror, a spark, an electrician, was on the top rail and he dropped the shades for the lamp, the outside shades which are adjustable. He dropped it through the screen. It went down near the bottom and then turned the air quarter and it went through the screen and made this huge hole. We hadn't even shot on it yet. So that caught my attention. We repaired it and carried on in the normal manner.
I think that's a perfect way to end.
Okay.
But thank you for your time, Brian. You're going to have your table there with all your cards, and people can chat to Brian a bit more about their loves of space and aliens and everything that you worked on. But thank you very much. And big round of applause for Mr. Brian Johnson.
Thank you.